morning and welcome to the Foggy Dew. This is Colin. Well, gang, as I was traveling around America this week, I had some time that I spent in hotel rooms. In being in a hotel room, I had plenty of time on my hands, so I actually ended up watching John Adams, the biopic on HBO Max, for like the fifth or sixth time. That biopic of John Adams, portrayed by Paul Giamatti, is just an absolutely brilliant show. And if you haven't seen it, I would definitely encourage you to watch it. But I was watching the second episode of the series. It's a 10-part series. But the second episode of the series actually looks at the Second Continental Congress and the decisions that those men made to actually declare independence from Britain. And it's interesting watching that show because you watch these guys and the gravity of the situation was not lost on them. They knew that what they were doing was totally revolutionary in world history. They knew what they were doing when they signed the Declaration of Independence. And again, I said gravity of the moment. That's really what it was. The gravity of the moment when they were in Philadelphia at the Second Continental Congress was absolutely not lost on any of those men, not the least of which they could end up signing their own death warrant by signing that document. But they knew what they were doing was breaking with Europe. So it's just so interesting watching it and watching the portrayal of it, and I absolutely love that series. So thinking about that, I was thinking about the gravity of the situation in the Second Continental Congress, and I realized I had written a story quite a while ago, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and get that story out. Well, the story that I wanted to talk about was a guy named Stephen Hopkins, who was a founding father you probably never heard of. So here's Stephen Hopkins. He was born in 1707 in the area which is now known as Rhode Island. Well, his family was fairly prominent in Rhode Island. His actually great-grandfather was one of the original settlers of Providence Plantations, and if you don't know what that is, Providence Plantations was the original colonial settlement in Rhode Island. Well, Hopkins' grandfather, beyond the great-grandfather, Hopkins' grandfather was a prominent Rhode Island politician also that bought land in a remote part of Rhode Island. So here's Hopkins himself. He has no formal education. He was largely self-taught because this kid just inhaled books. And the reason he was self-taught is because he was in such a remote area of Rhode Island that there were no schools. So this man's inhaling books, he's self-taught, he learned how to survey land. He learned to become a scientist, he worked on astronomy. Well, in addition to these other pursuits that he had, he also became a public servant. At the age of just 23 years old, this kid became a justice of the peace in a very small town in Rhode Island. Well, he wasn't done with politics after being a justice of the peace. Hopkins advanced in Rhode Island politics and ultimately ended up in Providence, Rhode Island, where he set up shop as a merchant. Well, this kept progressing, and then by 1755, Hopkins was actually the governor of Rhode Island. So this guy's the governor of Rhode Island when English Parliament ended up passing the stamp tax. Well, it's not the stamp tax, it's the Stamp Act, which applied a tax on the stamps. But the Stamp Act was part of this like very aggressive tax scheme on the colonies from the British. And the Stamp Act is really what kicked the revolution into high gear. So here you have Hopkins, who's now the governor of Rhode Island, and he wrote a colonial thought piece on the Stamp Act passing. And the piece that he wrote was called, quote, "The Rights of the Colonies Explained." This was very simple language written as a rebuttal to the Stamp Act, and that piece was widely circulated in all of the colonies, not just in Rhode Island. And that paper became a rallying cry for the mindset of colonial independence. It was a very powerful political rebuke at the time written by Hopkins. Well, obviously, if you write a paper like that, in a time like that, that rebuke of the crown then elevated Hopkins as a revolutionary leader in the colonial thought process. Well, by this point, he'd also even became a judge. Hopkins was actually the justice in Rhode Island, and he oversaw the prosecution of what was called the Gaspee Affair. The Gaspee Affair was a flashpoint in the bubbling revolution that was occurring in the colonies. What had happened in the Gaspee Affair is that a British customs ship called the HMS Gaspee had run aground in a Rhode Island bay. So what had happened is that this British vessel had run aground, and these Rhode Island like mercenaries went out and they burned it to the ground. So you have a British ship running aground and Rhode Island men lighting it on fire. So they light the Gaspee on fire when it was landed. Well, you can imagine how that went over in British eyes. The burning of the Gaspee was actually a direct assault on British rule. So here's Hopkins, a judge, where this whole case lands in front of him. Hopkins oversaw that, and there were 0 colonial indictments levied against the guys that did this. So you had 0 colonists punished by Hopkins for that attack. Well, that did what? It inflamed tensions even more. Well, by 1774, the First Continental Congress had been convened, and Hopkins was assigned as a Rhode Island delegate. The funny thing about Hopkins, he was so old. At that First Continental Congress, Hopkins was almost 69 years old. He was actually the second oldest man in the room behind Benjamin Franklin. So Hopkins was actually selected to the Second Continental Congress as well, the one that I was referencing in the John Adams biopic. Well, by 1776, when that had convened, Hopkins was 70 years old. Well, as a Rhode Island delegate, Hopkins signed the Declaration of Independence. And you can imagine at 70 years old, you have a myriad of health issues. Well, at 70 years old, Hopkins had palsy. So here's this Hopkins, who's this Rhode Island legend. He could barely hold a pen because his hand shook so badly. So as he's signing the Declaration of Independence in that Second Continental Congress, Hopkins was actually forced to steady his hands while he wrote his name on that famous document. So as he's writing this, Hopkins, this total badass, stated for posterity, quote, "My hands tremble, but my heart does not," end quote. My hands tremble, but my heart does not. He knew the gravity of the moment. Well, within months of signing the Declaration of Independence, Hopkins was actually forced to retire because he was in failing health. And this brave man that signed that document died in 1785 after seeing America set free by George Washington. The funny thing about him signing that, here's a 70-year-old man who's signing a declaration against the British Empire. He's a marked man at 70 years old. A 70-year-old man signing a document that would mark him for death. Again, I'm watching this thing in John Adams and just looking at how they're portraying the gravity of the moment. I just think it's so interesting looking at a guy like Hopkins, Stephen Hopkins, 70-year-old guy that sees what's going on. He sees the thirst for freedom in the colonies, and he says that, "My hand trembles, but my heart does not." All those men knew the gravity of the situation, and they knew what they were getting themselves into. It's just interesting to watch that whole dynamic. But I guess thank you, Stephen Hopkins. I mean, a true American patriot that people probably don't even remember. So I have a ton of topics that I wanted to get into, but the one that's probably most pressing on people's minds, and I think the thing that people want me to comment on, is what occurred, I guess it was Tuesday night in New York. And literally, I was getting like blown up, like, when are you going to have a show out about this? When are you going to have a show out about it? Well, here you go. It's so interesting watching what occurred in New York, because the thing I kept thinking about as I watched the election results tumble in, political parties in the US have always experienced like some level of like internal insurgency. And you don't have to look much further than the Republican Party. In 2007, you had the Tea Party emerge in the GOP. And that Tea Party was like this thread away from the large neocon status quo establishment wing of the party. I mean, they're essentially breaking with the neocon wing, and the Tea Party emerged really with the rise of Obamacare. It was like this realization inside of the GOP from like these, I guess, like grassroots activists, but it was like this realization by people on the right that the establishment GOP had really capitulated to big government progressivism. You had elements in the GOP back at that time that were basically locking arms with progressives. They were colluding with Democrats. So the base is watching what's happening with the establishment GOP back in 2000. The base is watching this whole like establishment wing link arms with Democrats. The Tea Party itself reflected the base of the party. So what was the Tea Party? It was basically, again, reflection of the base. It's grassroots, small government, fiscally conservative, limited government. And those are things, those are like tropes that are used by the establishment wing. The Tea Party actually set about to actually do the things that the establishment GOP always lies about. And tropes is the best way to think about it. Those small government, fiscally conservative, those are tropes that are used by rhinos. That's the establishment. They say those things in interviews with like CNN, MSNBC, and then they do the exact opposite. Well, the Tea Party itself, I guess, then found utility in channeling desire of the base. And if you look at the political impact of what happened with the Tea Party, like this like upstart inside the GOP, the Tea Party gave the GOP huge gains in the 2010 midterms. Because why? The base responded to it. But that entire movement was considered the counterweight to the rise of Barack Obama. The rise of Barack Obama coupled with the rise of the establishment GOP. Well, the Tea Party was the inevitable backlash of what was occurring in the establishment wing of the Democrat Party and the establishment wing of the Republican Party. The Tea Party itself, though, was relatively short-lived. Well, and why was that? You had this Tea Party, this upstart group of people that decided to go against the establishment grain. Well, what happened was the establishment wing of the GOP then subsumed the upstarts. They bought off the upstarts. The proud insurgents that were propelled by the base, the proud insurgents of the Tea Party were brought to heel by the establishment GOP very quickly. And what occurred in that process is the insurgents joined with the establishment. And the people that we're talking about, to be completely clear, people like Ted Cruz, Sarah Palin, Mike Huckabee, you remember Alan West? Bill Cassidy was a Tea Party member. Tim Scott. If you look at that list of people that I just mentioned, like half of those people aren't even in politics anymore. And half of them aren't even in politics. And the other half is like Ted Cruz. And Ted Cruz showed you exactly who he is. So you had these people that portrayed themselves as upstarts in the party. They're sitting there saying, we reflect the will of the base. And then what happened is that they're sitting there saying they reflect the will of the base. And what they did is they used the base to elevate themselves politically. Well, that's a betrayal of the base, right? So if I'm a base voter, realizing that Ted Cruz has now joined hands with the establishment GOP scumbags and becoming a rhino, the backlash to that betrayal was what? It was MAGA. The establishment itself didn't listen the first time. That's why the Tea Party started. MAGA directly arose as a response to the failure, the abject failure that was the Tea Party. That's why you got MAGA. And the easiest way for me to think about it, and maybe I'll just convey this, is that in both situations, with the Tea Party and then with MAGA, the base, meaning the people were speaking and the establishment wasn't listening. So here we have another example of political insurgency inside a large political party. The Democrat Party has not had a Tea Party moment. Well, guess what? They did on Tuesday night. The Democrat Party is the establishment, and here they are on Tuesday night with a night that's going to be considered a before and after moment in U.S. politics. What happened on Tuesday night was seismic, and I hope everybody understands that. You are going to talk about before and after, because what happened on Tuesday night is the state of New York held its congressional primaries. Well, bad news for Americans, right and left, Democrats, socialists swept those primaries. Mandami-backed socialists had a clean sweep of the primaries on Tuesday night. They went 3 for 3 with the socialists in New York against the establishment wing in the Democrat Party. And I guess I'm just going to make a couple observations about what I witnessed. And my first observation is that makes Mandami a kingmaker inside of the Democrat Party. Because politically, Mandami's star is ascendant in the party. His flavor, Mandami's flavor of politics is what the base apparently wants. I even saw him on TV on Wednesday night. He was on MSNBC and he's saying, the party is the people. The party is the people. Well, the problem that you have is that the candidates reflect the party and the people. And the problem with all of this, what happened on Tuesday night, is that the winners of these primaries are all hardcore socialists. They're not just socialists. You're talking about people that are collectivists. They're communists. And the other interesting wrinkle about what they are beyond their political ideology, they're also anti-Semitic. So what's happening in New York now is you're having socialist communists marrying anti-Semites and taking over a political party. It's interesting if you look at it. Dan Goldman was one of the incumbents that was unseated. And I don't like Dan Goldman at all. He's a progressive hack. I mean, Goldman is like a big-time progressive. The reason that Dan Goldman lost is because Dan Goldman supports Israel publicly. He supports Israel publicly, so this makes him a public enemy to the socialists. Support for Israel, and I've talked about this on the show, support for Israel is not a tenable position in the new political faction emerging on the left here. And I guess I'm sitting here watching this whole thing, and you've probably now been inundated for 24, 48 hours about what occurred. I'm looking at this whole thing big picture. So what is it going to mean? And what I'm telling you right now is what this means is you need to buckle up. You are going to see a completely new Democrat Party emerging in the next few years here. People like Mandami, AOC, Bernie Sanders, these people are in charge of the Democrat Socialist Party. And that's the easy. This is a Democrat Socialist Party with communist elements in it. These are the leaders now on the left. These are the intellectual thought leaders. This is where all the energy is. It's not people like Nancy Pelosi. It's not people like Chuck Schumer. It's not Hakeem Jeffries. Those are considered centrists. The problem with this is the centrists in the Democrat Party, in the establishment in the Democrat Party, are totally unnoticed with this whole thing. And what I would tell you watching this whole anti-Semitism thing emerge, unfortunately, in this party, what that would tell you is now is that a person like Josh Shapiro is not eligible in 2028. And the reason why is because Josh Shapiro is Jewish. You are not going to have a virulent anti-Semitic wing of the party that's going to allow their party, they consider it their party. They're not going to allow a person like Josh Shapiro. You would split the vote democratically. Even if they had a primary, they would split the vote. And why can't you have a person like Josh Shapiro? Because the base, and it's not just the base of New York, the base of the party won't tolerate it. And tolerate's the right word. They're not going to tolerate it. And what this does more broadly, beyond Josh Shapiro, what this also means is now that AOC is a legitimate frontrunner for 2028. AOC's a thought leader, man. She's the OG of socialism. She is a totally viable national candidate for the Democrat Party in 2028, and I wouldn't laugh about it. But the other main takeaway for me is that the Democrat Party that you knew is totally over. This was the party of JFK. That this like halcyon concept that some of the Democrat Party is the counterweight in honest brokers to the Republican Party is laughable at this point. They want to change the system. The old Democrat Party that your father knew, that you knew, the Democrat Party from 15, 20 years ago, that party's dead and buried. This is a post-America party, and it's a post-America party, and it's also an anti-America party. Post-America is the right way to think about it, because can you imagine these people? They're communist. A lot of them are Muslims. They're anti-Semitic. And I guess my question is, if you live in New York right now, don't you think that the 9/11 memorials moving forward are going to get really, really awkward? Really awkward. You know why? Because the 9/11 memorials are going to be celebrating the terrorists in New York City. That's where you're at. That's how dramatic this is. They're all sympathetic to the terrorists that hit us on 9/11. And if you go beyond kind of the just trite stuff that I just mentioned, a reasonable centrist in the Democrat Party is now homeless. So those are like the people around you. The people that live in suburban America, middle America, You no longer belong to the Democrat Party. You are now politically homeless. Suburban voters who don't realize this new reality are going to be forced to confront this. Because be it now or be it later, if you're a normal centrist Democrat voter, you're going to have to come to grips with this. You're going to have to watch what's really occurring in the party and see the threat of the base. You're going to have to see the threat of the base, because the problem with it is that now what's occurring is the vanguard of the Democrat Party is pro-Islam, pro-communism, anti-Israel, and anti-capitalist. And it's interesting to me, like looking about it, like all these like high intellect people, these people that walk around and are like, well, I'm a Democrat, I'm so intelligent. Guess what? The high intellect people, the Harvard class, the Yale class, the people that consider themselves experts, they've all been fooled. They've been hoodwinked. What they did, what this party did, is they played footsie with communism. Playing footsie with communism, this is the inevitable result every time. Once you bring that element in, it eats the party. Here's Bernie Sanders just in the height of just absolutely not understanding what's going on here. So here's Bernie Sanders on X after this. Listen to what this guy says. Bernie Sanders, quote, "Congratulations to Brad Lander and Claire Valdez on their landslide victories in New York congressional primaries. Together, we are creating a grassroots progressive movement that will defeat the oligarchs," end quote. I mean, calm down over there, Pol Pot. Together, we're creating a grassroots progressive movement that will defeat the oligarchs. Man, this guy is just totally ridiculous. He's like 85 years old and he's talking about defeating the oligarchs. Bernie Sanders is all in on this, man. He's the OG of this. Why wouldn't he be all in on it? The base of the Democrat Party is communist. The base is going to eat the establishment of the Democrat Party. And it's funny, you can say they have all the momentum. Look, in politics, people want results. If the establishment wing of the GOP was providing results to me as a Republican voter, I would keep voting for them. But the problem with it is they're not. People like John Cornyn, people like John Thune, people like Bill Cassidy, people like Lisa Murkowski are absolutely blocking what the base wants, which is why they're getting knocked out of office and vilified across the spectrum here. So people want results. That's not just a right issue. That's a left issue as well. So if you want results, guess who's providing you results? A person like Mandami. And if you're a base voter and you see results being provided by accepting communism as part of your platform, well, that's great, because now you have the wind at your back. You have somebody that's getting results. But the problem with all this, with accepting that ideology inside the tent, is that you can't stop this now. This is a contagion. It's a contagion that that will spread all across the country. Right now, think of it like an infection. Right now, New York is infected. The infection will spread, because what's going to happen is candidates are going to see this pattern, meaning somebody in Oklahoma, somebody in Utah, somebody across the country. The base of the party is going to see who's winning here. And the base is going to see who's winning, and the whole party is then going to be pulled hard left. So what you're going to have is you have places like California, Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, New Jersey. All of those states are at really great risk to being taken over by communists. And again, it's about results. So if you're seeing results, what you're going to see then is more and more of this insurgency inside of the Democrat Party. So broadly, the Democrat Party is going to be subsumed by communist socialists. And again, where does that lead us? In my personal opinion, everybody needed to watch what happened on Tuesday night. This is your new political reality. And I think because of this new reality, I think the Democrat Party is going to lose big in November. I think you have so many normal people on the Democrat side of the aisle that are watching what's going on here that actually understand the problem. People are not ready for this yet. It's like it's happening too soon. They would have been better off waiting for their mass to come up. People are not comfortable in the United States broadly with communism and socialism. I mean, we fought wars against these ideologies. And like most people in mid-America, if you're a mid-America Democrat, you're probably watching what's going on in New York and you're like, oh my God, man, I don't like this at all. I don't like it at all. That's not what they signed up for. These New York folks are just way too extreme for like your average mid-American person. And again, the centrist is now homeless. There's not some broad acceptance of communism in middle America. So I guess really now here's the problem is that there's going to be a civil war politically inside of the Democrat Party. The establishment is going to hang on for now. The establishment is going to try to hang on and just be like, hey, these are just a bunch of crazy people. This isn't really happening. And they're going to throw money. They're going to start throwing money behind centrist candidates. But what's going to happen is the base isn't going to allow them to do this. Because the base is going to eventually pull this party too hard left for the centrist. And then you have a problem on the right. It's always a cascading effect. Because the minute the centrist Democrat finds himself politically homeless, what they're going to have, you're going to have centrist Democrats actually joining the right then. And what you're going to see is then calls for a new political coalition. And one will emerge eventually. But I'm sorry, you cannot at this point, because the GOP is going through the same process right now, right? The base, which is MAGA, is eating the establishment. We're draining the swamp away. We're getting rid of the rhinos. The thing you don't want to have happen at this point is allow a bunch of psycho Democrats into the tent and portray themselves as Republicans. Because we've seen what that is. Democrats inside of the Republican Party are what? They're rhinos. We've spent, 16 years trying to get rid of these guys? The right base, the MAGA right, America First, whatever, populist nationalist, whatever you want to call it, the right base has rejected the establishment centrist position already. We're done with that. We're done with the Bill Cassidys. We're done with the Thunes. So I think overall what you're seeing is a complete realignment of U.S. politics. It's a total realignment, and this process has been occurring for 10 years. Look at what's happening in the Republican Party right now. Donald Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Elon Musk, those were Democrats that became Republicans. They were people that already experienced this tectonic shift. Again, it's been happening for 10, 15 years, and it's going to accelerate. It's going to accelerate, and I've said it on the show before. You're going to have militant right-wing nationalism, or you're going to have socialism and communism. Those are your choices. Because right now, neither one of these parties is trustworthy. But if you're asking me, I would much rather go with right-wing nationalism than socialism, communism. But I think if you're looking at this and you're being pragmatic, I think everybody is seeing this realignment, this trend now. And I just mentioned it a couple minutes ago. A lot of Democrats are going to be jumping ship now. There's not some broad appetite for communism and socialism nationally. So what's going to happen is for the foreseeable future, the Democrat Party is not going to be a national party. If you're a normal person and you're looking at the beating heart of the base and you're realizing where it's going, you're not going to be on board with that. So what I would then argue is that 26, regardless of what pollsters are saying, 26 is going to go red, and then you would have 28 go red. So you'd have 26 and 28 going red. And then what will happen in 2030 is that the census is going to change the electoral map altogether. Because, like, look, if you're like a normal Democrat now, like Capitol is fleeing New York in droves. So if you own a business in New York, you are fleeing the state. Where are you going to go? You're going to go to Texas. You're going to go to Florida. You're going to see even more of a population decline in these communist-controlled states and cities, and that's going to feed into the census in 2030. So really what you want to start thinking about now, 26, 28 red, you really want to start thinking about 32 and 34. 32 and 34 are going to be the pivotal elections now. But it's interesting, like even if you look at beyond the elections and like what matters now from an election standpoint, do you see New York ever coming back from this? I don't. How would you even fix it? I don't see New York State and New York City ever coming back now. And look, I would imagine it will be like a big political magnet. New York is going to be a political magnet, and what it's going to do, it's going to pull the next wave of political candidates into it. Like if you align with this ideology, you're going to be attracting people into your space. And the problem with this is that all of these people that are flocking to the socialist communist banner in places like New York, you're not going to be able to dislodge them. So you're not going to be able to get rid of these people in New York, and you have to consider New York State and New York City a captured, failed state. And then at that point, you just don't want the contagion to spread. Because you have to look at communism this way. This is what happens in every state where this occurs, meaning state, meaning nation. The question that you need to ask yourself, at what point does blue overwhelm red? At what point does the boat capsize? Because it does. It must. This isn't an invasion. It's an infection. Communists will infiltrate red. They will wear the jersey. And this is exactly what I was talking about a minute ago. We don't need a bunch of like infiltrating wolves in sheep's clothing coming to the GOP. There are people that wear the jersey, they say all the right things, and then they act the exact opposite. It's like John Thune. He's wearing the jersey, he says all the right things, but when it comes time to actually do what the base wants, he won't do it. And this is exactly why people in MAGA, people in America First, the right base always watches actions, not words, because we've been burned so many times. And I think it's interesting looking at this. I think about it also from the perspective of like the Trump angle. You really got to hate Donald Trump to want communism this bad. That's the thing I think is so mind-blowing. Like if I went to somebody normal today in like mid-Missouri or mid-America or whatever, I'm like, hey, like, what do you think about communists taking over? What do you think about communism taking over the Democrat Party? And what do you think about the rise of, Muslim communists in New York State and city? They're like, well, at least it's not Donald Trump. I mean, that's a bold strategy. You got to really hate Donald Trump to want communism for your kids. All I can tell you is that there is a new era of politics coming real soon, real fast. And the problem with it is that this contagion isn't addressed if voting isn't secure, if the border goes open, if there's mass amnesty, if the judiciary isn't fixed, then you got real problems. And all you can hope for right now is that normal people in the Democrat Party that affiliate with the Democrat Party wake up. Communism is being supported in the Democrat Party. It is a post-America party. We are in post-America with half of the electorate in the United States. Those are my thoughts on what happened in New York. I think we are in for a real long haul, to the point where you don't want to say this stuff, but balkanization, civil war starts becoming inevitable when you start looking at this stuff. These people are totally unhinged, and they're not going to stop here. It's a religion. Communism is a religion. And the more energy they get, the more success they get, the more it'll be replicated, the more it'll start popping up across the electorate across the United States. And again, places like Florida, places like Texas are not immune from this. Why? Because you have people that think this way going into red states. Well, just a little bit of communism gets us to win, and we can be more progressive in Texas. We can be more progressive, and then it just eats itself. And again, shame on all these people in the Democrat Party for allowing this to happen inside the party. They opened the door for this because they couldn't win on their ideas. They won on what? They won on hate. They won on taxing the rich. They won on defunding the police. It's identity politics 101, which is what? A marker of communism. That's how communism embeds itself. That's exactly what happened in Red Russia. But I guess nobody read a history book. Anyway, sorry, I tried to get out of that segment, and I just jumped right back into it. But absolutely wild in New York, and we'll all be watching it. So I had a totally separate topic that I wanted to address that I thought was good news. And I guess that good news is that the rise of right-wing nationalism in a place like Latin America is accelerating. And I've talked about Latin America before on the show many times, but now at this point you have Chile, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, Honduras, and Costa Rica that have all gone hard right wing. And it's not just like right wing populism. It's not their kind of like rhino politics. These are hardline right wingers. Hardline. So if you look at those places, go ahead and add Colombia to the list of right wing places. Colombia just elected a very hard right winger in as president, and that guy's name is De La Espriella. So De La Espriella just beat Gustavo Petro to win in Colombia this week. De La Espriella was backed by all of these other hard right wingers in Latin America and also by Donald Trump. And it's the first thing that I thought about when I saw this win. It's really funny to me how when the USAID and NGO money dries up, that all of a sudden the people start winning. The right starts winning when all USAID money goes away. USAID sent $34 million to Colombia in 2022. And they didn't send, USAID did not send the money to Colombia. That money went to Gustavo Petro. It went to Gustavo Petro, and what it is USAID slush money to basically rig the election for Petro. Do you want to know what the earmark of this USAID money was for this guy? The money was earmarked. This is a quote. The money was earmarked by USAID, quote, democracy, human rights, and governance. Democracy, human rights, and governance. Mainly governance. It's mainly for governance to rig elections because all this democracy and human rights, and it's all nonsense. It's cash for commies was what USAID was for. And this idea of like, I love it, democracy. Spreading democracy is code for left-wing globalism and communism. It's always with the democracy. But it's just funny to me how all this stuff works. The bogus money goes away, and all of a sudden the people are allowed to pick the candidate of their choice. How amazing is that? You've had 7 elections in Latin America, and you've had a clean sweep, 7 for 7 in Latin America for hard right wing when the USAID money goes away. And what does that do more broadly? It exposes the scam of USAID money and NGO money that goes into these less developed countries. You kick out China, you kick out USAID, and all of a sudden, poof, you've actually got real elections occurring with real leaders. It's interesting, beyond the obvious right-wing ascension in Latin America, I thought this statistic was so interesting. Do you know how many people are in Colombia? There's about 53 million people in Colombia. And why am I talking about the population in Colombia? 53 million people, and then the votes counted down there in a couple hours. 53 million people, the votes are counted in a couple hours. And it's funny to me because you have places like LA County that has 9 to 10 million residents, and it takes weeks. 9 to 10 million votes takes LA and California weeks, but a Latin America backwards country of 53 million can get it done in hours. And that's not a mistake. That's a design. That's the fraud lane. That's why this whole thing is so ridiculous. And I'm sitting here reading this thing about 53 million votes counted in a couple hours. LA and California are a national embarrassment. And you watch places like New York that I was just talking about. That's what's going to happen there. Weeks and weeks to count votes until the correct person wins. It's so obvious. It's so obvious all of this is fraud. And I love watching these people on the CNNs and the MSNBCs that sit there and tell you that none of this is, voting's secure. Yep, voting's secure. It takes weeks to count. It takes weeks to count votes. There's no ID allowed. You have ballot harvesting, ballot curing. Yep, no fraud there. Why do you need weeks to count the votes? Colombia did it in a couple hours. Colombia did it in a couple hours. Colombia is famous for what? Cocaine. So the country that's the cocaine capital of the world has better elections than California. That's great. I guess you just blow some coke down there and count your votes. And I guess you have to wonder, if you're being a physician, I wonder if the coke utilization sped up the counting. Maybe coke speeds up the counting and fentanyl slows it down. Is that what's occurring in LA? Just too much fentanyl, everybody's drugged out. They don't have time to count it. The alacrity of counting votes, I guess, depends on the drugs being imbibed by the counters. It's just unreal, man. We have to worry about the drugs that are being imbibed by the counters to figure out how fast the elections can proceed. Look, anyway, it's just unreal, man. Congrats to Latin America. Congrats to Latin America, 7 for 7. The Monroe Doctrine in full effect. The USAID money totally exposed for what it was. I mean, the USAID money was exposed as a globalist communist tool that we were funding as taxpayers. And then on top of that, you kick out China, and all of a sudden they're not using Chinese money and USAID money to rig elections. And you really wonder what happened in a place like Brazil. Is that how Lula got elected? Is that how Bolsonaro's in jail? I'm pretty sure at this point, if you had a legitimate election in Brazil, a person like Lula would never win, and that Morales, who's the judge, wouldn't be ruling for Lula, who's a communist. But it's just unbelievable to me that you had all of this U.S. taxpayer money that was funding, air quotes, democracy in places like Latin America, and the minute it dries up, the correct vote is achieved. But trust me, I'll be watching what happens in Latin America. I think it's totally fascinating. So back to domestic politics. One of the hottest things in our judicial system at this point is this Trump executive order on protecting our voting systems. That executive order that Trump issued is going to bring state systems to heel on voting processes. And really all it's doing, I've talked about on the show, all that executive order the executive order, all that is doing, it's asking these states to adhere to minimum federal standards. Minimum standards. That executive order is requiring these states that are out of compliance to provide current voter rolls. And again, you have 20 to 25 states that are refusing to provide their voter rolls. 20 to 25 states that are refusing to provide voter rolls to the federal government. And I've talked about it before. This executive order is going to end up at the Supreme Court. But the interesting thing is that executive order regarding elections faced its second challenge just this week. The first test was procedural, and it was talking about standing. That occurred a couple weeks ago. But this second one is noteworthy, and not for the reason you might think. So you have a judge that didn't agree with this executive order. The person's name, the judge, is Judge Sparkle Sukkanen. Old Sparkle Sukkanen doesn't like the executive order. So Sparkle argued that the Trump administration and federal agencies cannot create a centralized database for voting. What Judge Sparkle said, she's saying that since the federal cannot create a database, then the entire executive order is then invalid. The federal was planning to use an unlawful centralized database for voter verification, but Sparkle Sukkanen really is the story here. This is a Biden appointee. I mean, beyond the ridiculous name, I don't really care about that. It's just laughable. She's foreign born, if you couldn't divine that. This lady was born in Trinidad and Tobago. She's still a Trinidad citizen. Here you have a judge on the bench ruling on something that affects 330 million Americans. She hasn't renounced her Trinidad citizenship. She will not renounce her Trinidad citizenship until she's required to by law. So to be completely clear, you have a person with dual citizenry who is foreign born, who is now stymieing a duly elected president. Nobody, and I mean nobody, elected Sparkle Sukkanen or whatever her name is to make this ruling. 77 million people voted for Donald Trump and his agenda. An unelected foreign-born Trinidad citizen just stopped 77 million people, American citizens, and their duly elected president. Beyond the judicial tyranny which this woman is imposing on 77 million Americans, her ruling, if you read it, included this quote, "This court cannot stand idly by," end quote. This court cannot stand idly by. It's not your job to stand. What are you talking about? Sorry, Sparkle, that's not your job. That's not how judging works. That's how activism works. Saying you can't stand idly by is the mark of an activist, not a judge. Judges don't sit there and go, I can't stand idly by and watch something. No, that's not your job. Sparkle decreed from her throne that any alien owns America. Voting is for everyone. That's what she's saying. If you're breathing and on the planet Earth, you can vote in America. This court cannot stand idly by. Voting, apparently, secure voting is the Alamo for a person like Sparkle. And look at what I just talked about with Colombia. Without illegals, without USAID money, NGO money, and bogus voting, the Democrat Party cannot win in America. You think that this is isolated to places like Latin America? It's all bogus, man. They wanted to bring in 30 million people, 30 million illegals to outvote you. And make no mistake, the establishment wing of the party did this. The Democrat Party of Obama and Biden did this. They opened the gates to the foreign horde so then they could use their bogus voting apparatus to overthrow the country. What they would do is with all these people to overwhelm the system and they create a perpetual majority for themselves. It's a single party state. The flowery language by Obama, always talking about democracy. Same thing with Joe Biden, democracy, democracy, democracy. What they do is they're subverting the law in America. They're installing partisan judges like this Sparkle person. They're installing activists. Look at Justice Jackson. They're judicial activists that give you a puppet show of law. It's a veneer of law. And I promise you, this makes me absolutely mental. This Sparkle person should be taken off the bench immediately. But I guess good news for federalism and good news for the rule of law, this gambit by this Sparkle person is going to fail as it marches towards its conclusion, which will be at the Supreme Court. This executive order by Donald Trump is going to go through legal challenge after legal challenge and watch the clownish, cartoonish behavior of the people that are trying to stop it. Having a person like Sparkle Sukanan try to stop an executive order like this to me is laughable. It's going to end up at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to uphold it. They're going to uphold it. The Postmaster General just gave this whole thing away on Wednesday. The postmaster, part of the executive order revolves around the post office not providing mail-in ballots to people that are not registered voters by the federal. The Postmaster General stated on Wednesday that the post office will not deliver mail-in ballots to states in noncompliance with federal law, which i.e. is the executive order. That's your tell right there. The Supreme Court's going to uphold this because the executive order made no new rule. The executive order just uses existing federal law and federal systems. If these states are non-compliant to federal law, then federal services don't need to help them, i.e. the post office. And I guess, hey, Sparkle, we'll see you in court. And I promise you that the American people are going to have something to say about it. I had one last topic that I wrote about earlier this week that I wanted to go ahead and get off my plate because I thought it was so interesting. And if I wait till next week, it'll kind of be lost in the mist of time. But I talked a bunch on the show about how the UK is basically turning into a full-blown nanny state. I talked about this, I guess it was like a month or so ago. I talked about the UK government, the English government permanently banning smoking for younger people. The rule on smoking was anybody born January 1st, 2009 has anybody born beyond that date has a permanent ban on buying tobacco, vape, anything like that. But like if you were born December 31st, 2008, buying smokes is fine. It's a nanny state. They're trying to legislate human behavior. And the only thing I know about the government trying to legislate human behavior, that didn't really work out so great in Prohibition. And the challenge is to governments, doesn't matter if it's here, there, or anywhere, the challenge to governments trying to regulate human behavior is really myriad because governments are going to continue to absorb powers they don't have. And citizens lose more rights as the government accumulates them away from the citizenry. And I guess the adage is correct. Like, if you give the government an inch, they're going to take a yard. And that's the whole point of America, right? The government will never stop unless it's limited. And the thing I hope everybody learned in COVID, it's never about safety, it's about control. It's always about control when the government does anything. Government is never benevolent. Well, why am I talking about the UK and this whole thing with them being a nanny state? Well, the commies, and that's really what they are, the benevolent commies in the UK government have more plans for the citizenry. So just this week, Keir Starmer, and I'll get to him in a minute, but Keir Starmer just announced that there is now a social media ban on kids under 16. You heard that correctly. In the UK now, there is a total ban on social media if you are below the age of 16 years. And I'm going to read this quote because I think it's so fascinating. Here's Prime Minister Keir Starmer talking about this, the benevolent, loving dictator. Quote, "We are banning social media for under 16s. These days, kids must find their feet in a world where technology intrudes into every area of their life. I can't just let that go on anymore. So we are giving children their childhoods back," end quote. Man, he's so sweet. He cares. Keir Starmer cares. He cares about the kids. No, he doesn't. There's always a backstory. Tyrannical, you saw this in COVID. Tyrannical governments always couch things as a positive. They couch it as a positive when they talk about it, but these things rarely are. You have to read the fine print. The fine print tells the story when governments are trying to impose things like this. And here's the fine print. TikTok, Instagram, X, Snapchat, YouTube, and Facebook, those are all banned for kids under 16 years old. Those are user-to-user interfaces and apps that kids use. That same under 16 group is banned from live streaming. They're banned from game app messaging. They added more onto this. 16 to 17-year-olds have now a social media curfew. So there are limits on your phone if you're 16 or 17 years old. There's limits on your scrolling. It's almost like a ramp. So you get to 16, you can start using social media, but then they're going to put timelines on it for you. Anyone under 18 is also banned from like romantic dating apps, which that doesn't really matter to me, but they shouldn't be getting involved in that. The main point here is that under this new law, this is the rub. Under this new law, adults can still access social media. So adults can, if you're above 18 years old, you can still access social media, no problem. You can access it through age checks, facial recognition software, digital ID, and credit cards. Oh, so the government decided to put a gate that they meter. That's the poison pill here by the government. The poison pill in the fine print is that the citizenry can use social media all they want, but the government is going to give you permission to use social media. This is almost like the argument in the United States is, well, we'll allow gun ownership, but you have to take a class and register your firearm. No, that's a gateway to my right. Now what's happening is the government is allowing you to use social media based on the rules that they set forth. The government will allow you to have social media. The government will allow it. You just need to show facial recognition. You need to show digital ID. You need to provide a credit card. And that's really the point here. Online anonymity just died. This whole bill by Keir Starmer and his married band of communists has absolutely nothing to do with protecting kids. What this is doing, it's verifying and clarifying who is speaking online. The government now, by setting this up, has a gate. The government can control your access to free speech. Well, beyond that, that means that the government has everything it needs. Your identity as a citizen is linked to your online profile through these methodologies. Well, what happens is once the government has the gate set up and it controls your access, what they can do is they can overlay AI on that whole paradigm. Well, what they can do once they layer AI on it, the government and the police can then monitor online speech. And I don't know much, but that's 1984 Orwell. Again, it would be like getting a license to speak or utilize a right in the United States. They're not just registering you, they're permitting access for you. And let's be honest, nobody gets on a soapbox anymore. Online platforms are the public square now. Well, in the public square, hate to break it to you, but in the UK, the government is going to be watching and monitoring you. If you say something against Keir Starmer and his government, here comes the police knocking at your door. I hope everybody understands that. The UK government has arrested tens of thousands of people for putting memes online. They arrest people for putting memes online in the UK now. Well, when they control access to the platforms themselves, that'll accelerate. And what it does when is it they don't need to just have the police knock on your door. What happens is they can flag your account. They flag your credit cards, they flag your digital ID, and what they do is they impose travel bans on you. They can modify your social credit score. They can arrest you. Digital ID and central bank digital currency is the height of totalitarian thinking. Here's the plan from the Marxists, just to distill this in a brass tacks. Ban social media so kids can't see conservative content. Kids will not be able to see a dissenting opinion from the UK government. So you've eliminated the contagion of conservatism for children by getting rid of social media. And then what's going to happen is that public schools are going to provide the indoctrination that the government is benevolent and great. What they're doing is they're isolating children from dissenting thought. The only way that you could get dissenting thought is reading a book or talking to someone. Well, not only did they isolate children into this like ideological capture, you've isolated kids in ideological capture, but what they did is they also are forcing adults to require permission to speak online. This is going to accelerate and it's going to get faster and faster because the United Kingdom is in total dissent here. If you're doing things like that, let me just tell you something. That is the opposite of liberal. And that's not even a nanny state. You're moving well beyond a nanny state at that point. This is like Chairman Mao marrying Lenin and having a baby. Digital ID, central bank digital currency, online registration, those are the prison walls. Those are the new gulags. The prison is built for you online. And they do this kind of stuff in China. Again, they don't need to jail you. They don't need to arrest you. They don't need to take your guns. What they do is just turn you off. I don't need to come to your house and collect your guns. I can just turn your life off online. They freeze you. They ban you. It's never about safety. Freedom isn't safe. It's about control. And control never stops. And you'd be like, well, okay, well, guess what? I guess I'll just get a VPN. Wrong. You can't get a VPN because Keir Starmer, after this whole thing, said that they're banning the use of VPNs in the UK. So VPN security, if you want online anonymity, is banned also. And it's so funny, like talking about Keir Starmer, I mentioned I get into him. Keir Starmer is a total embarrassment. And I got texts about Keir Starmer resigning earlier this week. And I hope you saw that. Keir Starmer's resigning as the UK Prime Minister. And my thoughts on that is good. Keir Starmer was absolutely terrible. And it's interesting looking at like a Keir Starmer because Keir Starmer and the Labour Party won big a couple of years ago. They won huge and then they governed horribly. They had like a 2-year rolling embarrassment at a national government level. And what's going to happen in the UK? Now they're in this loop. There's no political insurgency that's going to happen in the UK. Keir Starmer is going to resign. And what's going to happen is that the UK government is going to get another Labour Party puppet installed in the government. And I'm already seeing it right now. The rumor mill, which means it's already happening, the rumor mill says it's going to be former Manchester Mayor, a guy named Andy Burnham. Well, do you think like Andy Burnham is some kind of like George Washington type that's going to like lead the UK out of the darkness? No. Burnham is another two-dimensional globalist puppet. And the takeaway from all this stuff is that the United Kingdom is not going to change anytime soon. The UK is like the prototype of being gripped by like woke globalism and soft tyranny. And this is the fate that awaits America if we don't wake up. And I think if you try to pull this nonsense about digital ID access, social media policing in the States, if the population isn't rioting against stuff like that, like if I look at the population of the UK and they're not rioting and burning down like Buckingham Palace at this point, they haven't hit their precipice yet. They haven't reached a boil where physical violence takes over. The problem with that is that they will at some point. And the real challenge is I talked about like an opposition party with like a George Washington. That what they have in the UK is a guy like Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage is a nice guy and he's a conservative, I guess. But there's too many snakes embedded in the UK Parliament to really change anything. And really what Farage, he's a centrist. He's not some right-winger. But if you ever got like a right-winger elected in the UK, you watch what happens on the ground. People would go bananas. But right now, those hard right-wing people can't get anything. They're totally locked out of government. You have a single-party state in the Labour Party in the UK. But it's just sad to see how far the UK's fallen. But banning digital access for kids and then creating gateways for adults with digital ID, that is like, again, Orwell 1984. Just unbelievable. Okay, I'll go ahead and wrap the show for this week, I guess. If you like the show, please go ahead and tell a friend about it. If you would, please follow us on Spotify. You can also follow us on Instagram at Foggy Dew Daily. Questions for the show, please go ahead and email us at foggydew95@gmail.com. But in the meantime, I'd ask you to say a prayer, ask questions, and stay vigilant. This is the Foggy Dew, signing off.